Okay, well, in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us for our grant writing for community organizations and partners. We're so thrilled with the outcome of how many registered, really such a diverse group of community-based organizations and partners, some of whom we know quite well and others that we're just getting to know. So we hope to continue to get to know you through this session and future workshops and other educational offerings that our program will be holding. But today we're going to focus specifically on grant writing for community organizations and partners. We're so glad that you're here. This event is hosted by the Community Health Equity and Engagement Research Team. My name is Jen Poger, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleagues, Paula Moody, Andrea Murray, and Jess Schrodel. And we all really love working with the community. We all have in various capacities over the last several years, whether it's through research or program or education. And it's just wonderful to get to hear your voice and your perspectives and try to make things better for everybody. And we know that the indispensable impact that you bring to all of the collaborations that we have with you. So thank you for joining. We hope this is an informative session for you. This was a topic that was really of interest for a lot of our community. So we certainly listen to what your concerns are and what you're interested in, and we really try to make actionable programming to support what your interests are and how we can help you best meet your goals. So this was one of those offerings. We will have an evaluation at the end of our session that we do encourage you to complete because it will guide future programming as well, so that we can make sure that we're continuing to address what your needs are. And we are also joined by my esteemed colleagues and friends, Nikki Maurer-Gray, we have Dr. William Callow and Rachel Mossbacher. So we're going to put in the chat for you a wonderful sneak peek of our presenters. We have their bios on there, as well as a sneak peek of everyone that's in the audience today. So if you haven't already checked that out, that was emailed last week. Feel free to download that from the chat and take a look. But briefly, I'll just share that Nikki Maurer-Gray is the Executive Director of the Community Health Council of Lebanon County. So she's going to share some wonderful tips and tricks that she has working for a community-based organization and how she secures funding for several important initiatives and programs. And then we also have Dr. William Callow, who's an assistant professor here at Penn State College of Medicine in the Department of Public Health Sciences. And he has extensive experience working with community partners on research. So really wonderful insights from him on the faculty end, on the academic side, partnering with the community to really bring about some positive change to improving lives. So excited to hear what he has to share. And then a little later, Rachel Mossbacher, who's a senior program officer from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, will be joining us for our Q&A session as a panelist. So any specific questions you have from somebody who reviews grants and really knows the ins and outs of what typically gets funded, she's certainly someone to reach out to as well during our Q&A. So just to go over some logistics, this presentation is being recorded. We do encourage you to raise your hand to ask questions, but also to utilize our chat feature. Feel free to make comments, add resources, and make connections throughout this entire workshop. We will be together for the next 2 hours. So we understand we're all adults. If you need to shut your video off and stretch or go grab a drink or tend to something, we totally understand. So make yourself comfy, and we're excited to have a very interactive session with you. We will answer questions as they come up if they're burning questions, but otherwise we will reserve most of our chat questions for our Q&A session. We do have a decent chunk of time that's devoted for that segment of our workshop today. We also will be utilizing a Google document, which we'll be placing in our chat for any breakout session that we go to. We'll have 2 breakouts today. And so anything that you would need for that breakout will be included on that Google document, which is really easy to access. And then all of our presentation materials will be shared following our session. We have some wonderful takeaways that our team has put together that will really hopefully serve as a nice toolkit for you to begin this process of grant writing if you feel like you're ready for that, or if it's something that you want to refer back to in the future as well. Also, just a heads up that we do have live transcript functionality available in Zoom. So if you need that, just you can go ahead and turn that on. It should be on your toolbar. If you would like to hide the subtitles, that's also an option too. After you click on live transcript, you can just select to hide the subtitle. So just for our agenda today, we'll walk through, we are going to kick things off with a networking breakout session. So this is an opportunity. One of the things that we love about all of our diverse group of community partners is the opportunity to network and get to know one another. So we figured we'd kick things off with a nice little session for you to work in small groups to exchange some ideas and information about yourselves and your organization, and then also what your experiences have been with grant writing up until this point. Then our cheer team will walk you through the basic fundamentals, so the what, why, and how of successful grant writing. This is really to try to lay the foundation for some of these basic pillars and tenets of grant writing. Certainly not to make you experts at this point, but at least to help guide you with the typical components of writing a grant application, especially if that's new for some of you. And then we will get to hear from our wonderful colleagues through our guest presentations. We'll go to a small group activity, and then we'll close with a Q&A. So to kick things off, I am just going to launch a poll now, just to gauge some baseline information on where things stand across the group. So feel free to just take a moment and answer those questions for me. We'll just give another few minutes just for some more responses to filter through, and then we'll share the results. Okay, so in terms of experience in grant writing, the majority of you have none or minimal, and that is why you're here. So that's what we would expect to see, and we're happy to see, because we hope that we can be a wonderful resource for you as you navigate that process. We have a lot of wonderful experts on our team who have done this and done this really well, and even those from the community that we partner with very frequently here at Penn State College of Medicine, who have embarked on this process and been very successful. So no worries, don't feel overwhelmed by any stretch, but if you do, that's okay too. Hopefully by the end of this session, you'll walk away with some more tips and tricks in your toolbox to get you started. And we certainly hope that you'll be walking away with more resources to help with grant writing by the end of our session. Okay. So just to go over our learning objectives for the day, they're pretty basic and grounded in what we hope would be an introductory course for you on grant writing. So understanding what a grant is and why it's beneficial to apply for a grant. Also being able to identify those key components of the grant application. And we'll walk you through understanding an overview of how to write a grant, and then certainly provide you with lots of resources along the way that can assist you with grant writing. Okay, so now we're going to break out into our first networking session. So in the chat, we're going to provide you with the Google session document that I was referring to, and you'll see some other things on there that we can hold off on reviewing at this point. You'll just be looking for the breakout #1 materials that will be posted on that Google document. And basically, when you get into your small groups, you're going to have about 10 to 12 minutes to meet and greet the different colleagues that you're with. And you'll talk about your level of experience with grant writing. And it's okay, again, if you've had none, that's fine. That's why you're here. And then for those of you that maybe have had success or heard of success stories, maybe sharing a little bit about those. And then we'll speak a little bit about your motivation for applying for a grant, and then any challenges that maybe you experience in applying for a grant, or maybe challenges as being reasons for why you haven't gotten started on that process yet. So we're going to launch our breakouts, and we'll meet back in about 12 minutes. We'll give you a 2-minute warning when we're ready to head back. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. I hope if you were able to join a breakout room that you had a lively discussion about your experience thus far with grant writing. We're going to go ahead now, and I'm going to pass to my wonderful colleague, Andrea Murray, and she's going to walk us through the what, why, and how of successful grant writing. And you'll get to hear from some of our other CEnR team members as well. So Andrea, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Jen. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, what exactly are grants and who provides them? So grants can come from many different places and entities. And so there typically are financial awards given to organizations or individuals to perform projects and programs. So if you have been a recipient of a grant before or have heard of organizations that provide grants, and you want to go ahead and share that in the chat, you can. But what we can tell you is that we know that grants come from a couple different places, and we'll go ahead and go through a list of them here. Most grants are given by federal agencies such as the NIH, CDC, and HRSA, state departments such as the Department of Health and Department of Education, nonprofit organizations such as PCORI, which is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, foundations and agencies, and also businesses provide grants to perform projects and programs. So as you're going and putting your places into the chat, I just wanted to let you know that we will also, the CEnR team, create a list of all of these great places that you're sharing with us to share with everybody after this presentation as well. And so definitely not a lack of places to find grants. And so we'll create a list for everybody from the ones that are being put into the chat to share with later. So why should community partners apply for grants? Number one, the impact to your community. Grants provide that funding to excel projects and programs or start new projects and programs in a pilot phase. Being able to share partnerships and share ideas. A lot of grants that we know about these days look for community impact and looked for many organizations to join together and apply for grants in simultaneous partnerships. They also help you highlight key aspects and needs of the community you serve. So while you're creating these grants and grant applications and partnering with folks across your community, it gives an opportunity to almost have a sounding board or a think tank of everything that's going on in your community and starting to think about what the needs are. And then also just achieving professional or personal growth. Every time you write a grant or apply for a grant, you learn something new through grant writing. And so these are all great ways why community partners should apply for grants. So we're going to talk a little bit about the grant life cycle, and starting here with the pre-award phase. So the pre-award phase is where you get to write and think about what you would like to do if given the funding. So it's made up of two parts, the funding opportunity announcement. So this is the announcement that the funding organization will send out to folks that may be interested in the grant, or they will broadcast these on websites like grants.gov to find, so folks can go and find those funding opportunity announcements. And then also the application review process. And so once we go through the funding opportunity announcement and then put through our application, there's an application review process by the folks that are providing the funding to give that information a look through and pick those that are awarded the grant. So funding opportunity announcements, important considerations. So definitely when looking at a funding opportunity announcement, be sure to read carefully over the entire grant. There are important things in there like dates and what are important dates to the grant application and life cycle, we have to look at, do they need a letter of intent before your application? When is that letter of intent due? When is the grant actually due in? And so one of the very first things I learned was definitely look at the dates, because putting an application together can be tedious and time consuming. And sometimes those dates don't give a lot of time or bandwidth for a lot of collaboration. What are the eligibility requirements for the grant? Does your community organization fit into the eligibility requirements or the project that you are proposing for that grant? Is the description and objectives of the grant a good match for you and your organization goals? So while it's really exciting to see that there's grant funding out there, you have to make sure that the funder and the description and objectives are a good match for you and your organization. Does the funding allotment cover all costs associated with the project? Is cost sharing a good option? So this is where you'll look and see, are they going to provide funding for not only the project in itself, but maybe for staff or for overhead for your community organization? And then what are the application requirements and required supporting documents? So are you going to need letters of support? Are you going to need budget justification? Are you going to need folks to be a part of this? And are you going to need their resumes or CVs to include with that grant application? So now it's time to write. So here are the main sections of a grant application: the applicant information, the program or project description that you're proposing for that application, the goals and objectives that your project or program are going to meet, the budget related to that project or program, and then the evaluation. So how are we going to show this grant funder that the money that they provided went to a good use? So how are we going to show them, the funder, what actually happened after the project or program was completed? Applicant information. Make sure you carefully read all of the instructions. We went over that and the importance of that. Complete each field and question, and then also check and double check your information. I can't stress how important this is, checking and double checking information. Here at the College of Medicine, we have great project teams, and we tend to cross populate our grant applications. So we make sure that we're not missing anything as we're applying for funding from different funders. The program and project description, definitely one of the most important parts of your actual application, and the part where you get to tell your funder what you really would like to do with that money and make a good persuasive pitch to them. So gather the information. Who's your target audience? What's the need? Why are you qualified to do this work? This is where you get to set yourself out from others and say, this is why we are the folks that are really great to get this funding to move forward a project or program that we'd like to do. Needs assessments. So needs assessments are really great for grant applications. This is going to show a funder an observed need that strengthens the application. And you do that by presenting a gap or problem and a rationale for the proposed project and program plan. So needs assessments can be done by your organization, or you can look at needs assessments that have been completed by other organizations, such as community health needs assessments, or even the census that's done by our own government. These assessments really help strengthen grant proposals. And then tell your story, definitely clearly describing in detail the project or program which you wish to be funded, and making sure it includes a timeline for completion and addresses the need that you have put in, that you identified possibly through a needs assessment or other means in your community.
Hi, everyone.
Sorry,
my name is
Paula. Over to Paula.
Yeah, my name is Paula Moody, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about the importance of writing a really detailed program description. and some of the tips and tricks that I personally learned along the way about how to make that a really rich process. I had the opportunity in a previous role to write a grant submission for something that we call the Diverse Student Champion Program, which was a mentorship program that paired students who are considered underrepresented in medicine with mentors on our Penn State Health campus. The description that you see here on the screen is kind of my starting point for explaining what this program was going to do. I had the chance to speak with the funder, and the funder gave me some ideas about how to really enrich what I had written here. So I want to draw your attention to, although I don't think you can you see me moving my cursor? Anybody? No?
No, Paula, oh, yes, now we can, Paula.
Yeah,
Yes.
can see you.
Oh,
That's
Yep.
me moving, Paula. I can move for you.
okay, so Jen, if you would just highlight the part that says UIM students. So, right. So there's really where this particular statement needed to be enriched. So because that was a space that I was working in at the time, and that phrasing was very familiar to me, I didn't stop long enough to think about that really needed to be defined, and defined very well. So what I did was, in the next slide, you'll see how I was really able to explain exactly what that statement means. So I was able to enrich it by drawing on some information from both the American Academy of Medical Colleges, or what we call the AAMC, as well as the United States Census Bureau, to help me define what UIM means. So underrepresented in medicine means what's defined here as those racial and ethnic populations that are underrepresented in the medical profession relative to their numbers in the general population. So it was really important for me to pull that information from the AAMC and further down in the paragraph about populations defined under the United States Census Bureau that are considered underrepresented also in central Pennsylvania. What that meant was I could explain to the funder what, or who rather, this program was intending to serve. So I share this with you because I went down kind of a path of assuming the funder knew that I meant what UIM, or sorry, assuming the funder understood what UIM meant. And when I went back to the funder for guidance, they thoughtfully asked me to explain that in better detail. And it really made a lot of sense, actually, to be able to do that using, as I said, these other really well-known and established agencies and organizations nationally that could help me define this population. Right, so then following that, what I was able to do is kind of pull some things that I learned that I want to share with you about my particular experience with that writing that particular grant. Again, it's just a snapshot because we're giving you a very broad overview of the grant writing process today, but that's just a little snapshot of what you might encounter when you are preparing some information related to the project description. So here are a couple of things that I would suggest to you to help you really write kind of a rich program description. That's your starting point, right? You want to make sure that the funder understands what you would like to use the money for. So define your population. Again, that seems like a really basic thing, but make sure the funder knows who you are intending to serve with the money that they are hopefully going to provide to you. Avoid using acronyms that are commonplace in your field and organization. Guilty as charged. As I said, I was using that acronym very, I will say almost casually, as if the funder understood that. They didn't, and I needed to really enrich that definition as I described. The third one here is make a connection to the geographic area in which you work. I did that by using evidence from the United States Census Bureau about what this population in central Pennsylvania is like. That's really important, in my opinion, when you're trying to prepare your program description, because you want to explain to the funder why what you're planning to do is important here, as I said on the slide. Why is it in this particular area in which you work important compared to other areas of the country, for example? So what does this population look like? Why is providing these services important in this area that you work in? The fourth one is to link your program with a broader or collective population overall. Although that's not evident in the slide that I just showed you, what I was able to do and the purpose of the Diverse Student Champion Program in its, in its root, the root purpose of it was to recruit, maintain, and promote students who are considered underrepresented in medicine. So that what that means ultimately is that it diversifies the physician population nationally. So if we start with trying to pull students into our College of Medicine and other fields of health service, if we start by diversifying that population from the beginning in a recruitment perspective, then we have something like the mentor program to maintain their involvement, help them be promoted, and then ultimately that will serve the broader population from a diversification perspective. So a diverse physician and health service population means improved service delivery to those other diverse populations that are seeking assistance in healthcare. And then finally, and it seems really straightforward, but follow the directions. I had the opportunity to really expand that definition that I showed you because I could keep that within the word count and word character that the funder required. There will be occasions where you really need to pair that, tailor that, and scale that back quite a bit. But if you can kind of check mark those things along the way, and use the character limit and the word limit to your benefit, then you can really provide a rich description. But follow the guidelines, cite references when appropriate, as I did, and I think you'll be in good shape. Thanks. So,
sorry, Paula, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about goals and objectives.
Yeah.
And goals and objectives, sometimes, I don't know, this for me can be sometimes the hardest thing to do when thinking about writing something concisely that you want to tell the funder that this is what my end result is going to be. And so you always want to make sure that you're connecting the goals you would like to accomplish with your needs assessment. It's really important, and I always have found this to be true, that if you think about keeping your goals SMART, which are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, it'll help you write some of the best goals and objectives that you can possibly write for any grant application. So if anybody ever sees anything or I've partnered with you, I always try to have some SMART goals and objectives as we're putting into applications. And so here are just some examples of some SMART goals. We see that we're really thinking about being as measurable with that 20%. So we know that this 20% is consistent with state records. And we want to make sure that sometimes overreaching with a higher percentage as a goal, it sometimes will help becoming unattainable. So we want to make sure that we're looking at other records when we're creating our goals. So this one here really, really specific with using that 20% instead of, all participants or some participants. And then down at the bottom there is another great goal. And this one is just showing how to be super specific. So offering 36 families with children and or youth ages 4 to 18 opportunities to participate in free hybrid cooking classes and tennis clinic programs through 3-week sessions. And so it's just not saying that we're going to provide these families opportunities to participate in cooking classes and tennis lessons, but it's being as specific as we possibly can about those goals. And then also looking at data. Has the funder outlined specific expectations for data collection? How do they want data to be collected? Where do they want data to be collected? And how do they want that data to then be presented? Your data collection goals should be tied to your goals and objectives as well. So making sure everything ties in together neatly. And then also utilizing existing data where possible. We talked a little bit about this in needs assessments, but looking for other organizations, groups, or other programs and partners that might have gathered data on a similar topic or a topic that is similar to your project and program, and utilizing that as well when creating goals and objectives related to data. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to Jen Posier now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea and Paula. I'm just going to walk us through now the last two sections of a typical grant application, including the budget and the evaluation section. So budget's a kind of hot topic area when it comes to submitting a grant. Lots of things to think through in terms of your expenses and how you're justifying those expenses. So really important to think through what those costs are and if they're justified, and there's a rationale that you can submit in your application to justify those accordingly. Thinking through the eligibility of expenses according to the grant regulations. So a lot of times there are different stipulations on allowable costs and then also costs that can't be charged to the grant. So again, really that underlying theme of making sure that you're reading the fine print of the grant application to learn those nuances in terms of how you set up your budget justification. And we're kind of going to walk through some examples of how we can do that in a way that makes it a strong justification for the anticipated cost that we have on the application. Also thinking through if the cost is sustainable over the duration of the project. Sometimes we have, on the academic arena, we have projects that can be up to 5 years or even longer. So kind of thinking through at the proposal development phase, what those costs will look like in year 5 can be quite challenging. But it's good to have that budget forecasting in mind and be able to think through what those anticipated costs might be so that you can include them in that overall budget for that entire project. Also thinking through if cost sharing is an option. So are there other entities that can help provide some of the costs that you'll need to accomplish your program or project that wouldn't necessarily need to be charged to the grant? And then also thinking through plan B, because we have seen several times on both the academic and community end of grant recipients that sometimes the funding gets cut. So what you had anticipated doing and accomplishing with a certain bucket of money looks a little bit smaller. So you have to kind of pivot and be able to still meet your goals and objectives, but do it in a little bit more of a fiscally responsible way. So always having a backup plan, I think, is smart in order to move quickly to start your project on time as well, if it does in fact get funded. So let's take a look at this example of a study budget. So let's say that you are a community director who is going to hold focus groups to learn about how the community feels about a particular program that you may like to offer to your community members. And you're also going to engage the broader community through a survey as well. So you have in those costs for, to fund part of your salary for this effort. You're also going to be paying your focus group participants for participating and your survey participants for their participation in the survey. So you're looking at around, 30 hours maybe for focus groups, and then let's say 200 participants for that may be completing the survey. And then maybe you'll write up that work. We have lots of community partners that end up writing about the work that they do in their communities, whether it's through some scholarly journals or some other outlets for dissemination. And maybe you also want to attend a conference. So let's say those costs are in there too. And to help advertise for these focus groups and surveys, you'll utilize some social media. And then there's also F&A. So F&A is our indirect costs. So these are the costs that are not part of your direct costs for the grant, but they're things that are needed to kind of keep things functioning. So think of overhead such as electricity, heating and cooling, things like that, that we can't charge directly to the grant. They're not directly part of your program or project, but they're needed on the background sort of to keep things afloat. So there's always usually a indirect charge as well that you would include in your overall budget. But let's dig a little deeper and look at the same example with just a little bit more of a fine tooth comb, kind of navigating through these different budget categories. So maybe you're thinking that it's not just you who will be facilitating some of these focus groups or distribution of your survey, but maybe you're going to also tack on your community coordinator and community health worker to help with recruitment for these focus groups and survey completion, and also to help facilitate those as well. So then you have those added salary costs. Also, when we look at some other miscellaneous expenses that come up as we think through this program or project, transcription services. So you'll be gathering this really rich, valuable data at these focus groups, but there's a lot of data that will surface from those that will need to be transcribed. So likely you would be recording that session, and then there would be some type of transcription service that you could pursue to have that transcript data readily available so that you can start to understand what the community needs are from that focus group. Also, maybe you want to partner with a statistician to look at that data a little bit more closely to help identify themes or different directions to move forward in based on those results. Also at your focus group, maybe you want to have some refreshments to offer to your participants. So that would be another added cost. Also thinking about travel. So are you reimbursing your participants for coming to those focus groups, or are you even leaving in a placeholder for travel for some of these conferences that you might attend? So kind of thinking through that as well. And then as we branch out this marketing and advertising, oftentimes it's several different modalities that we have to utilize to recruit folks into different programs or research studies. So while we think that maybe we can get who we need from one vehicle for advertisement, often we have to think outside of the box and plan accordingly. And usually those things come with a price tag. So you can see how quickly our budget has expanded much more as we broke down some of those other expenses. So when we think of our budget worksheet or spreadsheet that we would prepare for our funder as we apply for that grant, we also then have to have that coincide with a budget justification. And so that should collate very nicely with all of the line items that we said on our budget spreadsheet that we sort of allocated for different budget categories. So oftentimes a budget justification can become weak when we lack specificity. So let's say we list a budget item on our spreadsheet, but then we don't provide any description as to what it's for, why we need it, any justification or rationale for how that amount was calculated. That's going to be a red flag for funders. Also, if there's there's difficult to read, it's out of order from your budget. That's also sort of a common mistake that we see sometimes as we prepare these. It's much easier from a reviewer perspective if the line items that you have on your budget spreadsheet are very nicely in the same order as your budget justification, so that the reviewer can refer back to across both documents and really gain a rich understanding of what you're asking for, why you're asking for it, and why that amount makes sense. Certainly double checking those numbers to make sure they match. This is something that really needs to be checked and checked again and again, because we know that as we're preparing these, it goes through several iterations. And so making sure you're working with your team that's preparing the grant, and especially the folks that are involved that wear the financial hats on your team, making sure that they're double, triple checking those numbers, because Oftentimes things maybe are added originally to a budget and then they get dropped. If you've gone over in your allowable expenses, or you've had to make some other modifications. So kind of keeping track of that. And then oftentimes we see some grant folks who are submitting for grants that they focus too much on the smaller costs rather than allocating appropriate explanations for the bigger expenses. Obviously, the bigger the price tag, the more justification or rationale that is required. So let's take a look at this brief budget example for a justification. So, just saying I need to rent out a visit location space for $85,000 so that I can see patients for a research study. Just writing that really isn't as strong as really branching out. Where exactly is this location going to take place? Where are you seeing patients? What is the amount broken across all of the visits? So really breaking out, if I'm going to be renting out this space, and maybe it's at a community center that you're renting out, why do you need that space? How often will you be utilizing that space for how many visits? So this is really spelling out across the entire life cycle of the project, how many visits would take place at that, and then also explaining what this location is and why it's meaningful. So to Paula's point, really being specific and providing that context and background of why that location really matters to utilize for this particular research study. So you can just see the strength in really providing that level of detail. This way, reviewers aren't left questioning or flagging a piece of what you've contributed in terms of your budget justification. And so strengths of this is really that it follows the same order as the budget, as I mentioned. It lists the major costs and their explanations, salaries and wages, if allowable. A lot of our community grants, though, don't typically allow for that, but some do. So if you have that section, making sure that that's included, as well as any equipment, materials, support, and any travel that would be conducted. And then that you're really giving additional details to explain all costs included in the budget. Again, making sure that it's easy to read and follow, and trying to be concise. We do want you to be very detail oriented, but we don't want to make it a thesis so that reviewers get lost in the verbiage and aren't very easy to keep track of the different expenses that you've listed. Again, reiterating that the numbers match the numbers within the budget spreadsheet, and that you're only including budgeted items. So you're not adding on there anything that the granting agency had in their regulations that they wouldn't be able to supply funds for. And then the last section of a grant typically is the evaluation. And so this is really important when we think through how you're going to measure whether or not you're meeting the goals and objectives of the grant. This is something to really think through during that proposal phase, because it's important to make sure you're not just flying blind, right? That you're not just throwing out these wonderful ideas, but really have no way to measure if you've met those goals and objectives. So thinking through your evaluation plan is something that funders will care about. They'll want to see how what you put into practice, how effective it was. And so are you going to use different assessment tools such as surveys or interviews or other forms of data collection to really track the progress of your program or project and be able to make meaningful inferences on if it was effective? And also thinking through, are you prepared to put this together in a report for your funder? This is something that we don't just receive the money and there's a handoff and we just go on our merry way. Typically, there's lots of communication and collaboration among our funding agency throughout the entire life of the project. So, having those good relationships early, but those conversations will keep going on throughout your project in terms of progress reports and different tracking systems to make sure you're on track to continue to meet those milestones that you've set forth. Okay, I am now going to pass on to Nikki Maurer, and she's going to share experiences working on a grant as a community partner. And she is just a wealth of knowledge and a pleasure to know. So if you don't know her already, I'm excited for you to get to hear her speak. And then we'll move on with Dr. William Callow, and he's going to segue into discussing his partnership with a community-based organization, United Way 211, for a successful grant-funded project. So kind of a neat segue into all of you thinking about applying for grants, what this next step could look like for you as you gain some experience. There's always the possibility to partner on the academic side with our wonderful faculty at Penn State and our research team. So just food for thought, but I'll turn it over to Nikki now. And please, as a reminder, add questions to the chat. We will have an opportunity to review all questions that are posted. So if anything that was shared on the fundamentals piece, you have questions about, we're happy to take those when we get to that segment of the workshop. Okay, Nikki, I'm going to pass to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen. Well, hello, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here. I really feel honored to have been asked to participate in this. I do come from the Community Health Council of Lebanon County, and I've been in my position for about 4.5 years, which actually makes me a very novice grant writer. But we have had some success recently, and it's due to the team that I have working with in our county, and also the Community Health Council itself has been around for over 25 years and has been writing grants in that time. And we're being joined today by my board president, who I'm very lucky to have learned a lot from and worked with over the years. So I hope to do the team that I work with, justice today. So I would love to tell you just a little bit more about the Community Health Council while I have the opportunity, because I think it helps to understand how Countywide Health Coalition can get itself in a position to be a collaborative grant team member. So you can progress, Jen, thanks. Like I mentioned, the Health Council has been around since 1994. We are a 501c3, and really the coalition exists to help improve the health and quality of life here in Lebanon County, and was really created as a response to the first needs assessments that the Good Samaritan Hospital did in the mid-90s. We have a 26-member board of directors. We have a very large number of committees and events that all actually work to raise their own money. And many of the sectors in our community are represented on our board. So we have a lot of social service agencies represented, and also health organizations. So my position, in fact, is fully supported by WellSpan Health, and I'm very grateful for that. They actually support my position in 3 other counties, I bring that up because I'm very grateful for that opportunity, but also because it allows us to do fundraising that doesn't include the salary of an executive director, which I think really puts the Community Health Council in a unique position to be a true convener in some of these countywide, community-wide grants that we've received recently. I do think that funders, that gives us a bit of an advantage. So we are currently the fiduciary for a couple of large grants, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute. But we have been very fortunate to act as a backbone organization, and the grants that we have written recently have really posed the Community Health Council just in that respect, where we have subrecipients listed and we kind of just oversee the project instead of doing the whole project. So I was, again, very grateful to be asked to come speak today, because we have a very unique collaborative writing process here in our county. So I really hope to share with you some of those tips in working with other community partners. So you can go ahead and progress, Jen. This is the type of work that we do here. You can see that we operate in very many public health domains. This is not a complete list of all the initiatives that we have, but it does give kind of a full picture of the type of work that we're involved in the community. And you can see in the lower left, I've listed the type of grants that we look for. So while we will gladly be the recipient of funding from many sources not listed here, we are very non-discriminatory when it comes to receiving funds, but specifically, our team that we've compiled here in the county look mostly for state grants seem to be our sweet spot, but we have applied for federal and CDC grant funding, and a lot of corporate funding, mostly in the way of our very generous health systems in our county, and then of course private donors, and there's quite a laundry list of those private donors. So right now we are managing 2 pretty large grants from the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. One of them is for community violence prevention that we won 2 years ago, and then we are just launching a school mental health initiative that we wrote that grant with 3 school districts and 2 3 community providers using the Community Health Council as a backbone. We also are supported by the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, and we have a wide variety of smaller grants from local organizations like your Rotary Club, your Kiwanis, the Lions, and also the United Way. So just to give you a little picture of what who we operate under. So like I said, I have been extremely lucky to write with some very talented organizations here in our county. All told, our small combination of various grant writers and providers in our county, we've probably written about 6 to 10 grants. I couldn't even really put my finger on the number that we've written in the last, say, 3 years. As a coalition, operating a number of different initiatives, we've been really lucky to be able to use those initiatives to identify the shared goals and mission that we need to really seek the grants that are going to be most the best match for us. So I know earlier one of the presenters mentioned becoming a good match for your grant, and I am going to talk about that a little bit later, but that is really important that you identify the needs in your community long before you apply for any grants. So in our case, like I just mentioned, we have our shared goals that we've come together around have been creating a trauma-informed county. So we have a large number of the grants that we've written have been around doing work in the mental health space, trauma-informed space, community violence, as I mentioned, and of course now mental health supports in our community. All of our local health systems have identified mental health as being their one of their top 3 priorities in the last iteration of the needs assessments. So we do as a coalition try to match those priorities that the health systems are pushing. So here you'll see I've listed some of the most important traits of our team. I found that it usually takes about 30 to 45 days to put a pretty large grant together. So most of these people become your closest friends in that 30 days. And no, I mean, that is not a joke. In some of these instances, I have talked to my fellow grant writers more than my husband in those 30 days. So, that just can give you a little hint into the type of relationship that you develop. But I've listed trust here as our most secret ingredient. With tight deadlines and a lot of money on the line, I want to write with people whom I trust. And that doesn't just mean their ethics. It's really the people who, when they say that they're going to include something or they're going to add something to the grant, that they are going to do it. And I know that they're going to do it. And I have no doubt that when my turn is up, that it's going to be there when I get a look for it. That leads me to my next responsibility, which is clearly defined responsibilities. So I personally am not a great writer, and I have owned that as, pretty clear character deficit, but I am a good researcher and I'm a pretty good editor. So I know where I belong in our grant writing team. And in just a little bit, I'll show you some of our shared responsibilities that we have. So while some of us look for old content, we go into the archives, other folks are working on the budget or also gathering materials. So we also try to set realistic deadlines. These are very tight timeframes, like I mentioned. So we try to outline our deadlines early in the process. And then we pre-schedule frequent check-ins. So sometimes we'll only meet for a half an hour, but it really does help keep us on track. So those are some of the top qualities that I value in our collaborative writing process. So in this next slide, you'll see here, I've tried to sort of outline, it's a little helter-skelter, but what that process looks like over that 30 to 45 days. We will usually have an initial meeting where we have all read the grant in detail prior to the meeting, and we decide on the basic principles of the proposal. Are we missing anybody? Do we have all the right partners around the table? And do we think that we have the needs in our community that match this particular grant? We've had many more grant meetings than we've had grants that we've written. So when a grant opportunity comes up and one of us finds it, that team will come together pretty quickly to decide whether or not we're going to pursue writing. The next piece is the grant writing software, which I'm going to talk about in my next slide, but it's very important that we agree on the software that we're going to use and that everybody is up to speed on how to use it. So sometimes when we bring a new writer into the process, we will have a private meeting with that person just to get them on board with whichever software we've chosen for that particular process. Then we have a copy and pasting session, which is where we find content from other grants that we've written and we just plop it in. It just goes in. Even if it might not make it to the final cut, we put everything possible that we can find. That then goes to the writing process. We try to have one official writer, the one cohesive voice, and you'll hear me say that again, and one editor who actually makes the cuts. And everybody else will use the commenting feature in our collaborative software to make notes, knowing that it is one person's job to decide whether, because you don't want your content to just disappear. That sometimes happens. We usually also have a scrap pile of content. So we'll move content out of the main body of the grant into our scrap pile because we don't want to lose it, but we also we realize that we might not need it. We work on the budget then separately. There is somebody else usually in the grant process who is very good at collecting materials. Most of the grants we've written have had close to 20 letters of support. That is a job in itself. So we're very fortunate to have someone on our team who likes to do that. They prepare, all of the sample letters of support and help guide our other community partners through the process of submitting those to us on time. We always write our executive summary last, and our one writer usually does that, but that is something that we leave to the very end. And then we usually have one person who will load the grant and then another person who will double check everything before it gets pressed submit. So that's just an example of some of our common tasks, and then also the timeline. So these are some tips I've gathered. These are things that we found either we learned the hard way or, we've learned from other folks in our community who've done some writing. So the first one is to read the grant carefully. And I know Andrea mentioned that there are so many clues in the grant. The grant itself has everything you need, usually, including your keywords, your objectives, and the items of interest in the grant. So this is also when we'll start making note of all the character and/or word counts in your grant. We recently, and also a submission instructions or whatever. We recently spent about 14 days working on a grant only to find out on the day of submission that it needed to be snail mailed instead of emailed. So we missed that. that was an unusual requirement, but we, discovered it a little bit too late. I also can't tell you how many times we've lost hours of our life editing down after we misread the word count versus character count. So it's really important to know that it's a character count or a word count in your writing. We use Google Docs. We have found, now I know some companies, particularly large organizations, don't often give you access to Google Docs. There is usually a way around that. So I encourage you to find that because whether it's appealing for an exception at your company or doing grant work from your home computer, whatever you need to do, it does tend to be the easiest, lowest entry feature-rich tool that we use. You can comment, you can track changes, you can work simultaneously. That is really great when it's 3 days before your grant is due and everybody's in there together working simultaneously. And we can also chat in Google Docs. It's also important to, like I said earlier, to make sure everyone's comfortable using it and making sure that you have private training sessions with someone who's not comfortable. We also use Google Sheets for our budget, and we try to keep our budget very transparent. We want all of our partners to know exactly where every penny is being spent. And I'll often include notes in the budget. You can use, there's a comment feature in Google Sheets, where you can write notes about different budget items. You can keep kind of a running tally. And so that is also very useful to us. You often have to write your budget justifications and your narrative to match your other content. So that is a complication that can get messy towards the end of the grant writing process. So that's why I have here, and I'm just going to pop a little bit out of order, is to know your submission tool. So I'll give you an example. eGrants, which is our PCCD funded grant tool. We also submit our reports in eGrants. It is not user-friendly. In fact, none of the grant submission softwares I've worked in have been user-friendly. And sometimes someone's sole job is learning the submission tool. And that is like a super valuable tool beyond even writing the grant, because you can write a great grant and then end up missing the deadline because you weren't able to understand how to submit at the very end. So for example, in e-grants, you have to write a budget justification in every budget line item, but it's in a different area than where you put your narrative. And it's very important that your narrative matches what you've written in your budget justification. You have two different reviewers. They both need to understand everything, but they don't ever talk. So, you know, little idiosyncrasies like that with your tools is really important to understand. We did learn that the hard way, and we submitted some PCCD grants before we were successful, just learning that. Understanding the rubric of the grant, most grants will show you how many points each section is worth. So, you know, that gives you a very good idea of how much time you need to spend on different sections. If your problem statement is worth 35 points and your history or partnership section is only worth 10 points, you know, it gives you an idea of where you want to spend your time. I know that this team put together a sample rubric, and I encourage you to look at that, because there is a very, very big difference between something being clearly stated and something being not clearly stated. And sometimes you need a third independent reviewer of your final grant to really draw your attention to areas of the grant that just don't make sense or got too muddled because too many people were working on it. It just didn't have that cohesive voice, which leads me to my very last tip, which is, you know, having a cohesive voice. You really want to have that one person who's blending all of everyone's words together. I'm going to quickly go to the last slide that I have prepared. And these are just a few more final thoughts, some little tips and tricks. I know I'm coming against my time. So we never throw anything away at the Community Health Council. Like I mentioned earlier, it's been around for 24 years. We have a very strong history of really excellent grant writers at the Community Health Council, and we have their sample narratives from grants we received 15 years ago. And believe me, we're still updating them and using them. We also keep all of our things up to date, our board lists, our 501c documentation. Like, we know where all of those are because they're so common to every single grant. And it's useful to just have those nice and neat in a package ready to go, so you're not seeking them at the very last minute. Some of the best advice I've ever gotten is to not chase the money. So know what you're looking for, know what your community's needs are, and, you know, doing the pre-work and understanding your community's data is the best way. The grants will find you. You don't have to then usually find those grants. Something will come up and you'll say, oh my gosh, this is perfect. I've been waiting for this. In other words, you know, I like to try to say, keep the square peg out of the round hole. It's always hard to write a grant that's not quite right for your community. If you have the time, apply, and don't be afraid of rejection. Every good proposal that we've written has been a stepping stone to a better fit. And we reuse content all the time. I don't think I've ever written for a grant that we've only used one time. And ask for feedback. If you get denied in your grant and you have the opportunity to ask why you were denied, that is invaluable research on your part to do. And not a lot of people do that, take the time to do that. And often they'll share with you why you were not chosen. And then, you know, I've not ever had a lot of luck with grants.gov or some of these other grant softwares. So we keep a running tally of when opportunities most often open in our community. And we have like a shared calendar that we work on. And I would recommend that you do that as well as you're looking for funding opportunities. So again, I just am so grateful for the opportunity, and I hope that I told you something you didn't know. And thanks. I think we're going to have some Q&A later. So
that's right. Thank you so much, Nikki. That was phenomenal and chock full of wonderful suggestions and different tips from your wealth of experience doing this. So yes, please add questions to the chat as you need to, and we will certainly have a segment coming up to devote to answering those for you. So thank you again, Nikki. I'm now going to pass to Dr. William Callow, and he's going to share for us a successful community-based organization partnership that he was able to embark on with a wonderful community partner.
Thank you. This is William Call, Assistant Professor of Political Sciences here at the College of Medicine. And today I'll be talking about my own experience as a researcher and faculty working with community organizations. So I designed my my slide presentation to provide a little bit of context of the tips and tricks that you have heard from the speakers today morning. So this is more about my experience working with organization and putting context what you have heard from Nikki and Andrea and the other speakers. Before starting, I want to say that I 100% in agreement with what have been said so far. I think this concept that apply for grants, even for people like me and our faculty that we have to submit grants technically every month, the chances of being rejected are pretty high. Actually, that's probably the norm. So I think at the very beginning, it hurts a little bit, but I think you're getting used to that. And I agree with Nikki that, you know, you develop your grading skills over time, and all the materials and all the research that you're putting for a grant proposal, even if it's not funded, just keep it there, remind what it is, because you're going to be using that in the future. So you are not wasting your time in any way. And another thing, probably this is a little bit, before going to my talk, a little bit different from what Nikki mentioned, my own experience. I rely a lot on grants.gov, and they release a schedule every Friday. I know it's Friday, 2 or 3 p.m. I just flagged that, and I'm waiting for that every Friday to see what opportunities are gonna be released very, very soon. So I encourage you to get those listserv. Also for Picori, they also release grants and announcements almost every month. Usually they have a pretty good schedule that, you know, 2 or 3 times a year they will have this large funding opportunities. So I have a whiteboard in my bag. I know where these grants going to be released based on prior experience. So I keep a track on that. Okay, so we can advance slides. Okay, so I wanna focus today just to put my experience and some lessons learned that can help you with the tips and tricks that you have heard so far. I want to emphasize on one pilot project that I received some funding from our own Penn State CTSI pilot grant program. I was able to work with 2 amazing partners. One is a nonprofit community organization. Maybe some of you know them. Is a United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania 211 helpline. If you're not familiar with the helpline, you get your cell phone or your telephone and you dial 211, and you will have access to a lot of people they call information specialists who will be providing you information about social needs, services for the social needs that you may have in your own region. Different from other states here in Pennsylvania, they don't have like a statewide helpline. The helpline is divided across multiple regions. I was able to partner with the one in Southwestern Pennsylvania because I want to work with our more rural areas in the Appalachian area of the state. I also work with the state. I work with the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs, DDAP, because the project that I was trying to launch was to identify individuals at risk of disease of despair, and those are people who suffer behaviors related to alcohol abuse or overuse, drug abuse, suicidal ideation or behaviors, and I have a big interest on vaccine communication. So we put this project together during the fall of 2 years ago. We were able to also include a assessment for flu vaccination. The study goals that we tried 2 years ago are as follow. We tried to adapt a set of clinical risk assessment tools to be implemented in this community setting in the 211 helpline to identify individuals at greater risk of disease despair and also people who are due for the flu vaccine. And second, after developing this risk assessment tool, we want to see how feasible was to use a clinical tool in a non-clinical setting to identify those people and refer those people for potential services. I want to highlight one thing. We were not diagnosing people at risk of these conditions. We were just identifying people who would benefit from a formal diagnosis or treatment. So I just want to emphasize that. Next slide, please. I'm not going to be just talking about the success or the findings of our project, but I can tell you that in a short period of time, probably 4 months, we were able to recruit and assess over 1,000 callers, and almost 60% of them were at need of services to flu vaccination of disease of despair. So our approach was feasible to implement in this specific space and setting. We're looking for opportunities to expand and do a larger project in the future. But I wanna show you here the roles of these particular partners, and I want to use these to let you know in a moment about the lessons learned that I gained from this project, and how these lessons learned are helping me to write my future grants with these organizations and other organizations. With the 211 helpline, they helped me in the development of the risk assessment tool. I want to tell you that we developed this tool from evidence-based instruments that we identify, but keep in mind something. These callers were not calling the helpline to ask for these services. So we needed these information specialists to feel comfortable with the question that they will be asking for. So the people in the 211 helpline were instrumental, well, key for us to identify and put together a set of questions that they feel comfortable asking for, but at the same time that they knew their population will be comfortable with providing some responses. They help us with the implementation of the risk assessment tool in their actual workflow, and that included doing a CEnR training. And if you're not familiar with that, that is a community partner research ethics training. This is a training that we offer to community partners, so they understand the basic concept of research. And also they were key in data exchange activities. With the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs, they also participated in helping us with the development of the risk assessment. But this was very, very important. And I think this was one of the most beautiful aspects of these projects. We realized that not all the services or the information that was included in the 211 helpline was up to date at that point. So our state partners help the 211 helpline to update the list of referrals, specifically for drug and alcohol use services. And they also kind of create a category of quality of those services. You know, they identify these are free, these are no cost, these are the ones that we know they provide evidence-based diagnosis and treatment. So there was not the purpose of this pilot, but we found a great opportunity to update the list of referrals that moving forward they're going to be able to provide on a more consistent way. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna just mention a few things that I learned and you can use in your grant applications. Actually, I'm gonna be using those in my grant applications. I'm gonna read through and then I'll give you my own perspective. Create buy-in at start of the project. And you know, what methods of training you can use to create a sense of ownership. And this is very important. You're a researcher or you're a community partner and you are partnering with another organization, maybe the first time that you partner with them. This was my case in this particular project. So you want to make sure that they're as committed as you are to conduct this study and complete the study activities. Something that we did to create this buy-in was, as I mentioned, this CEnR training, because we want them to understand the requirements for doing research, but at the same time, we did something called behavioral rehearsals. We practiced with them, my team practiced with them role plays about colors. And it was very refreshing to see how they practice these calls, and we were able to exchange information. I think you can do X, Y, and Z. You can improve your language here, but at the same time, they told us, "Oh no, I have been dealing with these same kind of scenarios before, and I know from my own perspective and my own experience doing this job for the past 5-10 years that this is the way to approach that. And that was very important for me to understand that as researchers, I have some perspective, but when you translate that work to an actual community setting, there's people who have been doing this job 5-10 years, and you can learn from them. Okay, so I think that was another way to create buy-in, to be humble and tell them, thank you so much, I'm learning a lot from you. Another thing is open and frequent two-way communication through the project. And this may sound very simple, but I can tell you one example. We did not have communications only with the project director at that organization. We also involve the people from IT. We also involve 14, 15 information specialists. Some of these people join our meetings. We want them to understand that we all were equals. These were not meetings specifically for the PIs or for the leader of the organization. These were meetings open to everybody in that organization to learn and provide ideas and perspective. And in that way, we create buy-in from all different levels of the structure of that organization. And we always keep we always do our monthly meetings to keep partners informed. Instead of our team here at Penn State doing these meetings ourselves at the research team, these meetings were open to our community partners. So we join as equals. We show them that we all are important. And actually, something that we did in all our meetings, and I'm doing that even today, when I involve community partners, my very first slide is a slide showing the name, organization, and a picture of everybody involved in that project. And I ask my project managers to make sure that we have pictures of our community partners, and we put side by side with us, because we wanna show people, we wanna show researchers here that we all are one team. We're Penn State here with my friends at the 211 helpline and my other community partners. We're all equal. Next slide, please. Another thing is that we have to identify the partners, the partners need and understand the impact that participating in our projects will have in their operations. I know Nikki and Andrew were talking about budget. I think it's so important about writing in funds to support their efforts. As researchers, we get paid for the activities that we do. Many of these organizations, they need resources. They need to pay a portion of the salary of some people in order to conduct these studies. So especially as we're going to be asking them to provide some data, some information that is outside the scope of our actual work. So when you develop your grant applications, just be mindful about that. And one tip and trick that I do is that I start my budget proposal asking them what they need. And after that, I try to accommodate my research activity to the needs of those community organizations. As about the deliverables, because in my research space, I know writing manuscript, scientific conferences is the thing that we want to produce. We want to produce knowledge, but many community partners, they want to apply knowledge. Sometimes those two concepts are the same: knowledge acquisitions and knowledge application. But for community partners, knowledge application is the most important thing. When we conduct the study, we get these findings, we get this data, is shown to be effective. How we help them to translate that information into the day-to-day operations. Maybe all they want is an educational product, So understand where they needs that they want to see from this research in addition to participate. So you accommodate that as part of the thing that you plan to develop at the very end of this project. Next slide, please. Be creative. And I have been learning from my own experience that pilots are a great opportunity to be creative. And sometimes you start with your own research idea. As I mentioned in the project that I was funded through CTSI, it was all about diseases of despair. But I have an opportunity to explore other questions, including how I can integrate flu vaccination to this existing grant. I talked with my community partners. They saw that was a great idea. Actually, they receive over 100 vouchers for free flu vaccines at that region. So this is a great opportunity. Let's do it, because we can identify these vouchers for free vaccines. So be open to explore questions outside your pilot project or your project. But when you do that, I'll give you one advice: give priority to your partners' questions, ideas. And again, they know the operations, they know the region, they know the population better than you are as a scientist. So when they want to explore new things beyond of the project that you are trying to put, give priority to what they want to test or they want to ask. Establish strong community relations is key. I just want to emphasize that. Sometimes we require money to start a new project, but even if you don't have money for a large project, but you have some resources to bring a partner as a community advisor for even a different topic, please invite them. Don't think that because you're a researcher or because you are a community organization that have been working in this space for many, many years, it's always refreshing to have a new perspective. So you don't have to get a lot of money to do a new project. You can invite people to be advisors in your project. So please consider that is so helpful all the time. And, connect with your partners every time that you can. When I go to a regional or local conference or event, I try to find where they're sitting down, and I just sit down with them, chat with them. When I know some of those partners are coming to my region, for example, these people from this project were located in the Pittsburgh area. When they come to Hershey for family activities, I say, you can go and visit this restaurant. I have lunch with them when they were visiting our region. Try to connect with them outside the scope of the project. I think that creates that buy-in and better relations in the future. Next slide, please. And I think this is my last slide. Involve your partners early on the game. I think Nikki mentioned that, it's kind of important for the letters of support. Sometimes you need letters of support, and you have a partner, but maybe this letter needs to be signed by some other leader. And these decisions may take a few days or maybe a week. I know that for some organizations, they have an executive board. The board meets maybe every month. So you have to account for that time, because they need to bring maybe this letter of support of this project idea. They have to vote if they want to participate in that, and then that can take almost a month. And I have been experiencing that in the past. So involve your partners early, especially as you would need this letter of support, or maybe they need to vote for participating in your project or no. Important to tell them the expectations. Many community partners, or community organizations, they don't have experience working on research projects. So you have to tell them, realize the time, effort, and there needs to be a partner. What things you need to ask them, and they need to provide beyond their actual services. So this is very important to put those expectations from a center. And again, I think budget is very important. Add about their budget needs, and when you figure out what they need to participate, align that to your project scope and the number of partners that you will need. Something that I always learn, this is the last thing that I want to mention. Sometimes we want to give partners the same amount, but the reality is that some partners will have different needs. And it's very important to communicate with everybody why you're giving some partners more or less money. And you have to explain that front and center. And there's nothing bad about that. If you want a successful project, you need to understand that you may have to invest more money or more time with some partners versus others. And I think that's very important, just to understand from the very beginning and to execute through your project. Next slide, please. And I think that's my last slide. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of this talk.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Callow, and thank you, Nikki, for speaking before Dr. Callow. The information you shared is absolutely invaluable to all of us, and your experiences are just wonderful learning for all of us. So thank you so much. I'm Jess, and I am just here to quickly introduce another small group activity we're going to be taking on. We're going to divide you up into groups of 10, and we're running a little short on time, so we want to make sure we give ample opportunity for our question and answers to our wonderful guests after this. So we're only going to give you about 7 or 8 minutes in small groups. We're going to divide you up into groups of 10, and we are going to actually put in the chat a Google document that has a link to a recent funding announcement from PCORI. You've heard that term a few times today. PCORI is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute that offers a lot of grant funding opportunities to researchers and community partners. The link for the grant funding announcement that's in this Google document is for community partners specifically. We're also including a series of 10 questions that, as a small group, you can kind of divide and conquer is probably the best way to go about it. And just try to answer these 10 questions in your small groups, almost in a scavenger hunt like way, as you go through this announcement. We're going to put you in again for about 7-8 minutes, and then we'll bring you back into the big group. At that point, we will provide you with the answers to those questions. We're actually going to put them back in the same Google document. We're going to list the answers there. We'll have a quick debrief about what the experience was like looking for these answers to this scavenger hunt activity. And then we're going to finish up with a question and answer with our wonderful guest speakers today. So at this point, I'm going to put you in your small groups again. In the chat, you'll see the Google Doc, the link to it, and you'll see directions there under, it'll say, I think, breakout group or breakout group activity 2. So let me put you in your small groups again. And we'll give you about 7 or 8 minutes at this point. So go ahead, everyone, and you can join your groups now, your breakout groups. We realized that the time was very short for that exercise. We did not expect everybody to answer those questions or even get close to answering them at all. But really, the point of this exercise was just to show everybody how complicated funding announcements can be, and how very, very important reading the fine details is whenever we go to apply for grants. That was really the whole point of this scavenger hunt. It wasn't to make sure everybody got everything correct or erased or anything like that, but really just, again, to emphasize just the importance of reading everything with a fine-tooth comb. We are here, of course, at CEnR to help you guys. Afterwards, we're going to provide you with our information that if you're newer to this process or you have any questions, we are so happy to help you with that. We'll provide that information at the end. And also the answers to those 10 questions will be provided in that Google Doc that we shared as well. So that's going to be added in momentarily. So you'll have access to that as well. But just real quick, what was that experience like just now looking through that funding announcement and trying to answer those questions? Just maybe put in the chat a one-word answer if you wouldn't mind. If anybody would be willing to share what their initial reaction was to that activity. Overwhelming, difficult, stressful, especially when you only have a few minutes. Eye-opening, good, overwhelming, very specific. How valuable it would be to divide. Yes, these are such great points that I'm so glad so many of you are having that experience already so quickly in just this activity, because as we've talked about throughout the presentation today, you know, these are really challenging documents sometimes, and it is so important to do it as a team, divide and conquer. Felt like research, I like that, somebody wrote. Yeah, so it's just one of those points that we're just trying to emphasize over and over again, is just how applying for grants can be a really challenging experience, and just how important it is really to be very detail oriented and really divide and conquer if you can with colleagues is oftentimes a great strategy to go about it. So the great news is that we have with us, we're going to go into our question and answer segment now for these last few minutes of the workshop. Rachel Mossbacher is joining our other speakers that we've had today who've been so amazing. Rachel is actually a senior program officer from PCORI, which was the funding announcement from which we just looked from the PCORI group. So we are so excited to have Rachel join us. And what we would love to do at this point is welcome Rachel, welcome back Dr. Kahlo and Nikki and Andrea, and ask for you to give us any questions, if you'd like to put them in the chat at this point, that you may have for this wonderful group of speakers and experts in the field. And again, welcome Rachel. We're so glad to have you here from PCORI as our Senior Program Officer.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
So I know we did have a few questions actually that came in before the workshop that was when you registered. There were a few questions that folks presented. Paula, did you want to go ahead and present one of those questions a while to our wonderful panel of experts? Actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead. I have one right here. So for our group, which is again, Dr. Kahlo, Nikki, Rachel, and Andrea, here's a question for you. Could a list of community grants or grant organizations be made available from the course?
Hi, yeah, this is Andrea. So great question. And I think we had that in the chat earlier. And so just to let everybody know that after this presentation, we'll be providing you with a bunch of information as a follow-up, the recording and documents. But one of those documents will be a comprehensive list of where you and your organizations can go and look for grant funding specific to a project or program you're interested in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I see somebody has a hand up. Alexis, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. So I've I've read a couple of these, requests, like a request for funding or things like that. For, opportunities or things like that. And sometimes I find that like I have a project that I'm working on, but it may be like in its really early stages, and I don't quite have the data or whatever that I need to get the grant, that I would think I would need to get the grant. Or maybe the project aligns but like doesn't completely align. Like, should I be looking at other grant, like should I just not look at those grants, or should I think about applying to those grants even though I'm not quite where I need to be, for those types of grants? I think that's my question, because I feel like a grant never comes around when I need it, basically. So
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. I don't know if it's specifically directed to me, but in terms of my program at PCORI, we really encourage folks to reach out and set up what we call program fit calls, so that you have the opportunity to talk to someone from the program and they can tell you, how your idea maybe does, or in the ways in which it does not align with the funding opportunity. If there's flexibility in your concept, you might be able to say, okay, I'll hold on to this, but maybe I'll adapt this so that it's more in line. Or, like I feel like I heard mentioned earlier, if there is a misalignment, then, it may not be the best use of your time. But before you jump in to, start working on one of these things, it is really best to get a feel from someone who works on the program, if it is at all compatible and in what ways, so that you can make the determination about whether it's, worth the investment and the time.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thanks for that awesome question as well. Another question that came in from the chat is from Stephanie, who said, do you have to have a nonprofit or for-profit business set up when applying for grants? And then she followed up with is it best to have a nonprofit or for-profit organization? So I'm wondering if anybody has any thoughts about that.
Yeah, sure. So I can answer that one too. So Stephanie, you don't necessarily have to have nonprofit status to apply for a grant, but you're going to want to make sure that when you're reading the grant and the fund and the request for proposals, that you're going to want to see if the grant is meant for nonprofit organizations. If it is, and obviously, yes, you would have to be. You don't necessarily have to have a nonprofit organization as part of your grant writing team. However, in community engaged research, we definitely encourage having all sectors of a community be a part of that writing process and a part of your writing team. And so I saw Rachel also unmute here too, so I'll let her piggyback off of my comment there.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I would just add that, the question of whether you are better off as a nonprofit or a for-profit, certainly a good one, depending on what you're applying for. In the case of our funding opportunities, it is simply that you have to be an organization versus an individual. So that's something to look for as well. If you are looking to apply on behalf of an organization, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, that might be acceptable, but it might not be acceptable for you as an individual to apply for something. So you might have to incorporate yourself, make yourself into a very small nonprofit organization or something like that, but just another sort of fine print thing to look out for.
I'll share one of the questions that was posed by some of the participants when they first registered for the workshop. And that question is, what is the best time of year to search for grants? Or is there a best time of year to do that?
I think it's I was just say I think it's different based on the reality is you want to keep a pulse on if there are funders that you think might be appropriate for your ideas. Oftentimes there will be cycles. So sometimes there are opportunities that are open year round and you can just sort of apply anytime, but often for funders, they will have funding cycles which will repeat themselves year over year. So I can tell you for our program, we have 2 cycles a year, one in the spring and one in the fall. That's typically, the way a funder will function. And if you look back and you see when they previously had open funding opportunities, it'll give you a good idea if they don't have them all listed of when a future one might be available. So we only list one cycle ahead, but you can anticipate, unless there's some major change, that the 2 cycles a year will likely be available for the coming years.
Yeah, I think that really builds off of what Nikki suggested in her presentation, which is to develop a calendar of opportunities. So I imagine as you progress through this process and learn more and more about funders that might align with the goals and objectives of your particular organization, then perhaps those are the ones that you want to be sure are on your calendar on a regular basis. Nikki, happy to hear more from you if you feel that is not accurate.
No, I think that's very accurate. I was just going to say, it does seem like a lot of funders want to have their funding begin at the beginning of a fiscal year, which would be July 1, or at the beginning of the calendar year, which is of course January 1. So we do see a lot of grant opportunities open in March, which gives the funder time to review before the beginning of the fiscal year. March seems to be very popular. September also seems to be very popular, but it does depend. It's, sometimes you'll see a grant opportunity open in March and you'll realize that they're not even looking at the applications until September.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikki, for that helpful answer. And to everyone else, Dr. Callow, there was a question specifically for you. How can we create an app for our business? I don't know if you can kind of answer that quickly, or maybe we could provide that information also in follow-up documents that we're going to be providing to everyone as well.
I don't have an answer, but I know we have great people at CTSI who can help with those business development questions. I think they can help with that.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I think that's one that we will look at in the cheer team afterwards with Dr. Callow, maybe talk about that, and we can send that out to you, Stephanie, and hopefully present that to others who might have the same question. So thank you for that. And again, there will be a lot of follow-up information after this workshop today that we will be sending out to everyone so that you have all of this wonderful information that's been presented. Jen, I think we're going to go ahead and shut down the question and answers at this point, just because we are looking at only a few minutes left. So Jen, do you want to go ahead and finish up our workshop for the day?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I just want to take a moment to thank again all of our wonderful presenters and guest panelists today. I really appreciate your time. And as Jess mentioned, we will be working with them to sift through any remaining questions you might have. So any other last minute thoughts, please do plug into the chat and we'll send out in our follow-up materials lots of wonderful resources, all of the slides from today that were presented, and the video recording once it's made available for public viewing. We will also share that as well. So stay tuned for all of that. And I just wanted to let you know about some other upcoming chair programming that we have. Soon we will be hosting at the Penn State Clinical and Translational Science Institute. They hold a monthly translational science seminar series. And so the next one that our team will actually be presenting at will be community engagement across Penn State, landscape and resources to support community academic partnerships. And that is coming up at the end of September. It's actually September 29th. So we are going to pop in the registration link. If that's something that interests you, we'll also include that for sure in our follow-up email to you. And then we have some other exciting workshops coming up as well that we will include you on our listserv. Feel free to be removed from that listserv if you're not interested in hearing about us, but otherwise we will be sure to keep you in the loop of all of our wonderful offerings that we have planned over this academic year and future semesters as well to come. Best place to contact us is through our email. We're always happy to work with you on an individual basis. We also do consults, so if you need anything from us, please feel free to reach out. And I just want to thank all of you for your wonderful participation and engagement. Really just blown away by the wonderful amount of and volume of folks that joined today and all of your expertise that you added to our discussion from our presenters and our guest panelists. So thank you all. And we will be in touch with our follow-up documentation.